everyone, and welcome to Shannon Q. I am Shannon Q, and this is...
Paulogia.
This is Paul from Paulogia, who is joining me today, and we are going to... We'll get into what we're going to do later. First, hi, thank you for coming back. I've been kind of on a hiatus for a little while because we've been moving. You'll notice that my background is different because I'm in a different house with a different person in a different room than I'm usually in. So we had to kind of rebuild both of our setups over here, both mine and Paul's, and move, which took some time. So thank you for being patient. Our setups are mostly kind of rebuilt now, so we should be able to do more of these things where we talk to you guys and review some things. So let me preface this by saying that the video that we're reviewing is Paul's fault, because Paul showed me the video and I pitched a little bit of a conniption fit and decided that this would be something that it would be good for the two of us to have a discussion about. So
Whenever Shannon's mad at a video, it's usually my fault.
Generally speaking, yes, that is the case. That is the case. So a little while ago, maybe you can, why don't you set it up? Where did this come from? What are we talking about today? So, since I'm going to defer to you, why don't you tell me, lead me?
We are going to be looking at a clip, what seems to be a clip from a longer live stream, which seems to be a longer Q&A live stream. Mm-hmm. But Mike Winger, a Christian apologist, who primarily focuses on pastoral type stuff, and internal Christian critique as opposed to interacting with the arguments for God and that kind of thing, which is all fine. Mike had a question come in regarding 1 Corinthians 14 verses 34 and 35, which will be quoted upcoming, so I don't want to spoil the surprise. But it's a rather, even when I was a Christian,
right,
and I memorized 1 Corinthians, and I led students in memorizing some of this material, it's been problematic long before I was an atheist. Mm-hmm. These are verses that are problematic even to people who believe the Bible is true in God and stuff. So it's
hard to reconcile.
We're delving into an area of the Bible that is just problematic.
Right. And I want to do my best to be charitable when discussing this, but it's going to be admittedly slightly difficult.
Although in a way what we're addressing, I think we don't know how this conversation is going to go. The way I think it's going to go is the way Mike is handling it is what we're objecting to as much as the content of the verses, I would say, right?
Right. Yeah. I would say so. Well, no spoilers, I guess, but because people haven't heard it yet, so people can judge for themselves. But I have some objections to the degree of what I see as sort of obfuscation to why it's a problem. But we can get into that. Are we ready to go? And we will take questions if you guys want to send super chats or whatever. We will take questions at the end. I'm not going to count you as a guest. We can take questions on their way through even today. Because I'm not in... you are a guest. I'm sorry. You're a guest. Though you live here, so it's your house too. Here. Okay, cool. So we are going to start. Oh, thank you. There's a super chat already. AXP was excellent today, Shannon. You take down bigots like a seasoned pro. Yeah, thanks. If anybody didn't watch AXP, I'm sorry I got yelly. I did get a little yelly on AXP today. That's the thing that happened. So, if you're new here, there's a 50% chance that this will actually have sound. I think we did it. So we're going to get into Mike talking about it, and then Paul and I will have a discussion. So there's going to be, it's a very brief clip. I think the whole clip is only like 12 minutes, and we're only going to play about like 8 minutes of it, maybe, which means that the stream will be 3 to 4 hours long. Yeah, exactly. All right. So is everybody ready to hear what Mike Winger has to say about the whammons speaking in church and just in general? Let's go.
Let me read the passage to you guys, and then we'll walk through some of the issues here. It says in 1 Corinthians 14, 34 and 35, the women are to keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but are to subject themselves. Just as the law also says, if they desire to learn anything, let them ask their own husbands at home, for it is improper for a woman to speak in church. Now you understand why people are debating on this section of Scripture. Let me tackle these issues one at a time. First, is it added? I defer to scholarship here. I'm not a textual critic. I'm not qualified to be the one telling us these are the verses that belong and don't.
I muted myself. Okay, so Paul actually looked this up, and you maybe have a couple things to say on this, on whether or not it was originally in or wasn't in, whether Paul wrote it. So.
Right. So as Mike said, these are clearly problematic verses. Women ought to remain silent in church, and so it makes sense that some Christians and scholars might wonder why are these verses in here, and maybe if we can find an out and exit clause as to why they're not even biblical, we can just make ourselves not seem so terrible. But the basic controversy is that in all the oldest manuscripts, there's a discrepancy about where these verses lie. So where that section that Mike just read. So in some of the old manuscripts, those two verses are after the final verse of the chapter. So we're talking about 1 Corinthians 14. So after verse 40 is where those verses lie in some of the manuscripts. And in some of the manuscripts, they lie between verses 33 and 36, the way they are in most Bibles now. So obviously, there's some funny business since this section is somewhere else. Some places it's in manuscripts in one place, some manuscripts in another place. Something's going on there. One of the things that happened was that scribes would make endnotes and side notes and various things on different manuscripts, notes for themselves, which is reasonable. People write in their own Bibles all the time. Right. And so one indicator may be that the reason why this was at the end was maybe someone made an endnote for themselves, and then that endnote got copied, and right. Maybe these weren't Paul's original writings. Now, fueling the fire in Codex Vaticanus, which is one of the oldest and most complete versions of the Bible we have. There's from the 4th century. We have only a handful of complete Bibles from then. This is one of them. It actually has a couple of dashes before these verses and a couple of dashes after. Now, the scribe who wrote this codex used to put his own notes, like whenever he would make his own notes, he would put those dashes before and after the sections.
Right.
So some have said, well, maybe this scribe from the 4th century knew something that we didn't, that in fact these couple verses were to be notes and not part of the scripture. Now, that's a lot of weight to put on a couple of dashes.
Fair
obviously,
enough.
Right?
Yeah.
The important thing to note is that we have no copies of 1 Corinthians where these verses are omitted. They are in every single copy we've ever had. Just some copies it's in one place, some copies it's another, and there's maybe one of the better known manuscripts, there's maybe a hint that maybe it was a note. So that's the entire extent of the controversy there.
Right.
I don't...
And Mike accepts it. Well, he'll go on to say it himself that he defers to scholarship.
Right, and I think if it's purely opinion time now, I kind of also get why, it's kind of handy if you can wave these verses away rather than try and explain them.
Right. I mean, yeah. Okay, cool.
So that was Bible lesson time. All right.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. It's valuable to know, and I would, I guess, prefer if somebody is a Christian that they could find a way to hand wave it away.
Right.
Because what follows from it isn't ideal, even when you attempt to whitewash it, which seems to be the case. It seems to be what is happening in most instances where people address this, is that it's sort of just it's not that bad. It's not oppression.
Right.
It's just,
right.
We're just yada, yada, yada. Like the yada, yada, yada over it to the point that it's a little bit ridiculous to me. But anyway, whatever. We'll go on and we'll listen to what Mike has to say, because the substance of what I wanted to get to isn't quite here yet.
As far as I can tell, it seems like a real minority of people that suggest that it's added. Mm-hmm. And I can sense a motivation to want to remove these verses from the text of Scripture.
Yeah.
I did actually read through a breakdown of the various manuscripts where there's it's like in a margin here, or it's dislocated here in this manuscript or that
So
manuscript.
he's agreeing with you on
And
that. Yeah.
it does seem to me, based on what they're reporting, that it seems unlikely that it was added. Like we should struggle with this. And this is, of course, why you're going to see this in the main text, not the footnotes, but the main text of pretty much any translation you grab. Seems pretty consistent. The ones I checked, it was all there. So I'm going to say we should struggle with this text. We should apply this to our lives. But
Okay, so the reason I'm pausing is because he acknowledges that we should struggle with it. So he must see why that there's something that's not okay about this, right? Like you have that sort of moral imperative that you feel as though this is something that's not this is not quite right. Like this shouldn't wash with an ethical perspective of how to treat.
Right. If you get tickets to the Super
Women.
Bowl, you don't put this verse on your sign. 1 Corinthians 14, 34, 35, baby. Woo!
Tell those women to be quiet.
Yeah, no, this is not the one. This is not the banner verse for recruitment.
Right.
No.
Well, I mean, I guess good that he at least acknowledges that it's an issue, but then he goes on to
No,
essentially
but inside
say-
the church, it's wrecked a lot of people. I've seen it happen. So
Right. Okay. Well, we'll keep going because the substance is coming up now. Like that was just the preface, and also just to let you know, somebody asked him this question in the chat that he didn't
right.
just come going, hey, guess what? That's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
context helps. It helps us to realize it. And here's the thing. We live in a trigger society. When you bring up the issue of women and their roles,
Okay, this is where I want to start talking. This is where this is what I'm going to start. I'm trying to find a way to speak constructively so that somebody like Mike will listen and not just dismiss what I'm saying because, I'm being triggered. Because that's a quick way to just dismiss what I feel are legitimate concerns and points. But I don't know if you guys all picked it up, but he said we live in a trigger society, and the moment that you talk about the roles of women. Now, what that means is that women have certain roles, which means that they have different roles than men. Like that when you talk about the fact, essentially what he's saying...
Roles are gendered.
Right, exactly. That when you say that there are specific gendered roles, people get triggered. And saying people get triggered is a super dismissive term, right? It's a way of saying you don't have to listen to this person because they're overreacting. They're being intensely sensitive in a way that is rational. So you don't have to listen to their critique or their counterpoint because they're being triggered. But then out of the other side of your mouth say, there's roles that are gendered, which means that you and I have very different places in society because I'm a women's. Am I off base there?
Oh no.
Okay.
That was
Am I being triggered?
That was incredibly dismissive language.
Right.
It was exactly as you said. It was. You can ignore what they say because they are just. They're like a women and and they're emotionally reacting.
Well, he's not even saying you can ignore what they say, but that seems to be kind of the implication is that you need to be careful because people are going to be overly emotional when it comes to this topic. And their emotions are going to override their reason as a result.
Right.
That's
so-
what you're intended to infer from a statement like that. So he needs to be careful to make sure that he gets through to irrational people because otherwus they're going to overreact.
Mike's going to tell us why we're overreacting to this.
Oh yes, he is. He is. He's gonna tell us. He sure is. Or I'll let him talk again. I'll let you talk.
you are so careful with what you say because you don't want to be misunderstood.
No, you don't.
Paul didn't do
He's
that
very
at all.
clear. No, Paul didn't.
No.
If you want to understand him, you got to read him carefully. You can't be like, Paul, you better not say it that way. Like, for instance, here's a careful reading of Paul. He says they are to subject themselves, which is the opposite of somebody subjecting them. God's counsel to women about roles of submission is always that it's intentional and purposeful. A man who's forcing a woman to submit, that's oppression, that's abuse. A woman who chooses to submit, a child who chooses to submit, an employee who chooses to submit. These are godly ways of honoring Christ and humility and serving in.
Okay. Do you want to go before I do?
No,
because
no, all
okay.
you.
You're going to defer to me? Okay.
Yes.
I don't appreciate the language being used here. There's a lot of rhetorical devices at play here when you look at the communication strategy that's being utilized. He's saying that you can't perceive it as oppressive. It's not fair to perceive it as oppressive because a woman is making a choice to subjugate herself. Right? Am I reading that incorrectly?
Yeah, that is what he said.
Okay.
Yeah.
So because a woman is making a choice to subjugate herself, then essentially you're taking away her freedom of choice if you suggest that that's the wrong decision. Which I think ignores a lot, like a significant amount. What it ignores is that why would a woman subjugate herself? Why? Like, could you answer that question? Why would a woman in this scenario, do you think reasonably would think that she needs to, or that it's a reasonable decision to, or that it would be a good idea to subjugate herself to become submissive?
Any human gender, either gender, I may decide to be more quiet when there's talking about. When we're in a conversation talking about brain things, I'm just going to, well, you know what? I don't know as much about Shannon, so I'm going to defer here on that topic. So that's a reason. There is a legitimate, I think that other person has more to offer than I do. I suppose that's one.
Okay.
I don't think that's the answer you're looking for.
No, that's not the answer I'm looking for, because what that says is that people who aren't women just inherently have more to offer when it comes to having theological or intellectual discussions.
Oh, well, that is what he says.
Right.
At some point, so.
Yes.
I didn't know what you were going for.
So, no, that's okay. So that's a valid point, because that would be the perception that they have, right? So you're giving women the perception that they inherently have less to offer. So they should be subjugating themselves. That would be the thing that they should do, because what they have to contribute is substantively perceived as of less value.
Yes.
Right. Another reason they would subjugate themselves is because the infrastructure of this religious belief is stating that they should, that it's the godly thing to do, which is, I think, why Mike has this position, because the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it, right? So the Bible is telling him women have less to offer in this particular, even, we'll get into what he thinks overall, because he's a complementarian.
Right.
But even like giving him the benefit of the doubt, he's essentially saying that in this particular scenario, which is a woman speaking in church, and he'll elaborate on it more, a woman inherently has less of value to offer than a man, and thus it would behoove her to just be quiet and defer to the men in this scenario.
Well,
and I don't understand why people wouldn't have a serious issue with that. Like, everyone.
Absolutely should.
Both men and women.
The Christian church in general, at least the one I was raised in, was very much authority driven, and the more you can emphasize authority in all things, because we're basically supposed to be subjecting ourselves to God's authority.
Right.
And then we in the congregation are supposed to be subjecting ourselves to the authority of the leaders. And then within the congregation, you have the women who are subjecting themselves to the authority of men, and that's a hierarchy that they benefit. Obviously they benefit from. I've thought about this. People have asked me before, well, if you could send a message to yourself at age 15 or whatever, like about religion, what would you say? And honestly, one of my things I think to get through to myself, it would have to be like, just don't trust authority.
Don't inherently trust authority.
Don't inherently trust authority. Like it's because everything it's just an authority says so, an authority says so, an authority says so, and I think this is a way of baking in some of that authoritarian structure.
Yeah, potentially. That could make some sense. Okay, we'll listen to a little bit more of what he has to say. He's got so much more to say.
whatever role God's given you. So there's an example of how he'll say subject themselves, and they'll think of it as a trigger term. And I'm like, actually, that's kind of like a women's rights thing, along with biblical. I'm a complementarian. This seems like a complementarian passage here.
I'm pausing it. I'm pausing it again. I'll try to be more brief this time, because I hold issue to saying that it's a women's rights thing. I know he keeps using trigger term, and that is such a supplant for mental priming, so that anybody who hears words from someone like me is going to affiliate that with an irrational reaction, as opposed to a measured and logical one.
Right.
That's based on the fact that this is ridiculous. And I don't know if that's deliberate or not, but I hold issue with it for that reason, because it's a rhetorical device made to make you think that somebody like me is being irrational when I'm addressing it. But saying that it's a women's right thing is it's ridiculous, because nobody is saying that a woman can't choose to have a submissive role should she desire. Like, if she's making an informed decision and that's the way that she wants to live her life, it is her right to make that choice. Nobody is suggesting otherwise. People aren't holding issue with an individual who makes an informed choice to do something like that. What people are holding issue is the implication that that is the role that everyone like me should naturally have, and what follows from that. And what follows from that is people who is women going into environments where they are coerced into believing that that is a role that they should have against their best interests, and not having the same sort of informed consent that they would going into another environment, let's say, and choosing a role that people might see as being traditionally a role of subjugation or a submissive role. Did I articulate that okay? I'm not sure if I articulated that okay. What did you get the gist of what I was saying from that?
The way I took what you're saying was that obviously no one has a problem with women who want to, of their own volition, choose to play a particular role, be it a mother. So I'm just going from roles in the church that I grew up in. The women were told they could be wives, they could be mothers, they can teach Sunday school, and they can sing songs on the stage, and that's the extent of what they can do.
Right.
Generally in life, like, honestly, it's not even like you can't go be a teacher, you can't be. No, those are the basic. You do those four things. You raise children, and if what you were saying was, if someone of their own volition chooses to do that,
right,
go for it.
Basically, yes.
Go for it.
Yeah.
But that being raised from birth, that's the extent of your options.
Right. And not only that's the extent of your options, that you're coerced into believing that if you make a different choice, you're somehow bad or deviant or ungodly.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
The issue isn't a woman making a choice to, be a wife or a stay-at-home mother, or in other ways, defer to an authority figure or a male in their life in specific instances. It's that this sets up structures in society that are held up by people like Mike, where women are coerced into believing that these are their only choices, and not only that these are their only choices, that making a different choice says a certain kind of thing about who they are, and that thing is negative.
Right.
And that's horrible. That's horrible. Like, somebody like me, I contribute to society. I raise a kid. I'm a relatively good person, as people go. I think I'm all right, but I don't subjugate myself. I work, and I don't feel as though you need to lead me anywhere. I can handle myself. One of the best things about our relationship, I think, is that we're both completely fine independently and choose to be together, not because either one of us needs each other, but because both of us want to be together. And that's a healthy relationship. An unhealthy relationship is one where somebody feels as though they're entirely dependent upon and subjugated by another.
Well, Mike is going to let us know that we could be better.
Well, I mean, we could all be better.
If you would just listen to me all the time.
Okay. We'll keep going.
As opposed to egalitarian, where we would, they would kind of push against this text for various reasons. So
yeah, let's not elaborate
let's
on the
put it in
reasons.
more
Various
context.
reasons.
With
Various reasons.
1 Corinthians, as a whole, Paul is actually okay with women talking in church. He is, for sure he is. 1
is the
Corinthians
point.
11:5 makes it clear that women were prophesying in the church, and Paul was okay with this. So they were prophesying in church. In Acts, we get more context of the first century church, where it talks about Philip and how he had 7 daughters that prophesied. So there's women who are speaking, and prophetic speech is a special kind of speech, right? Like they're not just talking in church; they're actually proclaiming truths about God. It's prophecy. They're they're bringing forth stuff under the leading of the Spirit.
So I'm just pausing for a second just so that everybody catches that women can speak in church under the very specific set of circumstances that God is using them to generate prophecy for that church. So keep that in mind. So God is using their mouths to say words, to speak prophecy in the church. That's okay. Just keep that in mind.
That word silent, though, it may not be the best translation to say women should keep silent in churches. The word silent, sigao, is the Greek. It means to refrain, or at least one of the meanings, which seems to be the meaning here, to refrain from using a particular kind of speech or speech in a certain context. So then we zoom out from verse 34 and 35 and get the context. Here's my interpretation of it for your consideration. The judgment of prophecy is the whole context in verses 29 through 35. We already know in 1 Corinthians 11:5 women can give prophecy in church, but in 1 Corinthians 14, verses 29 through 35, it's about the judgment of prophecy, the evaluation of prophecy. If verses 34 and 35 are seen in that context, then an interpretation seems obvious to me. And I'm going to quote here from Anthony Thistleton, his commentary on 1 Corinthians. He puts it this way: the speaking in question, the speaking that the woman's asked not to do, denotes the activity of sifting or weighing the words of prophets, especially about asking probing questions about the prophet's theology or even the prophet's lifestyle in public. This is where Paul's like, let them ask at home.
Okay. So, just to be clear, if you could, audience and Paul, tell me if I'm misinterpreting this. So what Mike is saying here is that a woman can speak if through her mouth she is giving prophecy from her mouth in the church. She can give she can prophesy, she can be a prophet. However, should she make any prophetic speech or hear any other prophetic speech, she cannot make commentary on it. So this is what blew my mind. So a woman...
Don't you know this makes it better?
This doesn't... So I can speak a prophecy. Mm-hmm. I can be a prophetess.
Well, you can be God's puppet.
I guess right. God can
literally just mimic your mouth and put words in it.
But then once the word God has put in my lady face, have exited my mouth,
right,
I cannot contribute anything to how to interpret the words even I have said.
No.
And certainly not the words anybody else has said. And that
makes it better.
Makes it better. That makes it better.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm allowed to make mouth noises at all. At all.
Right.
And I'm allowed to make the most important kind of mouth noises.
Right.
Which is prophecy.
Yep.
God can use me to do that. But once he does that, I need to shut up and let the men figure out what it means.
What if I told you that if you had questions,
I can't.
you could ask me at home?
Like, I could ask you, yeah. Well,
Not share your opinion with me at home, by the way. It's just ask me at home to mansplain for you
right?
the words of prophecy that you yourself may have spoken.
It just blows my mind that someone can say that out loud and then say that it's not oppressive. Because if should I have the audacity to make a prophecy, let's say I'm Christian, right? So I have the audacity to make a prophecy and then have an opinion about the things that I literally just said. I will be told that my opinion on the things that I literally just said out of my mouth hole in
Right.
my lady face
Right.
don't matter.
Not only don't matter, shouldn't be entertained.
Right, that's exactly right. Like somebody else can now tell me what I meant.
And if you disagree, you have to shut up.
And if I disagree, I have to go home. I have to hold that in
Yep.
and go home and then ask my husband
Right.
when nobody else can see me deigning to assume that I have the right to speak towards something like this or but not even the right, the ability to be able to contribute to this theology. We wouldn't even want someone to see me thinking that like it would be so disobedient and how embarrassing for you if I thought for a moment that I could contribute to understanding theology. That's why I have to go home and then ask you what I think about it. Yep. Like, why would I need to ask you at all? Why can't I formulate my own thoughts? Why do I even need to ask you?
Because your lady brain is probably wrong.
Oh my gosh. It floors me how that's better. And to say it's not oppression. How though? Like, what's your definition of oppression?
Well,
that's what I don't understand. We let you talk at all, but only in
because this verse, frankly, is not about voluntary submissiveness. This is literally saying they ought not to speak.
Right. Correct. It's a prescription.
They should ask. So it's like it's a command to the rest of the church to shut that down.
Right.
It's not that all the women should just choose to fold their hands and be quiet. It's that it should not be tolerated. So that's a yeah. This whole idea that if it's not voluntary submission at that point.
No, it's not.
It's rules of conduct.
Which is why I think that this is obfuscation. It's just, it's spraying perfume on a pile of shit and going, it smells like roses. Like, that's what it is to me.
I think it's more like tossing vinegar on it.
Yeah, it's not even...
It's not even perfume.
It's not even perfume.
No.
Really. And then using, like, very pointed rhetorical language to indicate that anybody who does have a problem has a problem because we live in a society where now people are triggered, as opposed to this just being a problem.
Right. If you think this is a problem, you're probably the woke word.
I am probably woke. Oh gosh. Oh, hi, student Dr. Ben. Thank you for the super chat. Just wanted to say hi and show my support. My only question for you both is, why are you so awesome? I'm not very awesome, but Paul's pretty cool. Look how cute he is. All right. Are you ready for more? He's got more to say. It's not over. It's never going to be over. This is a 7-minute long video. It's probably going to be streaming for like 3 hours. Oh, gosh.
Depending on how the translation renders it, let them ask their own husbands at home if they want to understand something.
If they want to understand something. Like I was just standing there struggling to understand the words I just...
So the other funny thing about that is, if they want to understand, so the default situation is the women probably don't even want to understand. Probably. Why would they even want to understand? But if they do, go home and ask. That's okay. Some of the women want to know what's going on.
Oh gosh, it's hard.
Have them wash the cups later. Wash the communion cups.
If they want to, have them ask their husbands if they want to understand.
That's right.
It's not like that they can just inherently understand on their own. This is better, guys. This is way better. This isn't oppression.
He's clarifying things.
Oh my gosh. This is probably going to trigger some people. Oh, woke SJW is always getting triggered by being told they need to shut up and ask their husbands if they want to. I should have waited until, well, we're already home. Maybe now I can ask you.
You can ask me
here.
here.
Can you help me understand?
Yeah.
I don't understand why Mike thinks this makes it better. Can you help me
I don't even know why you
understand?
want to understand, but okay.
The idea is somebody giving prophecy, a word of the Lord. Could be a man, could be a woman. Then there's the elders and leaders of the church who are considered the faithful, reliable leaders who are in the context of, I believe, Paul's writing, supposed to be men. And these guys are judging the prophecy. They're like, let's test that word. And maybe they ask the guy. They ask about the consistency of his walk. They ask if he has endorsements from other church leaders, if he's a guest. You know, do you have like letters from the church you came from?
So I just love this. Imagine the scenario. You walk in. Who's walking around with letters of recommendation from their church?
As they're prophesying.
Like,
I know.
I don't. What? In what context? First of all, like 5 to 10% of the people were even literate. So who's wandering around? Look, I got a note from my pastor that says what I say is from God. So.
And also, he's laying out that the leaders. So what he's talking about now is who isn't allowed to question someone who is doing these prophecies, right?
Right.
And he already said that women could do prophesying, right?
Yeah, they can be the puppet.
So what this entails then is that a woman could be subjected to these questions herself. So the doggy is shaking behind us. So a woman could be making a prophecy or doing a prophecy or whatever, and then have to subject herself to these questions. But there's no scenario where she's allowed to ask even another woman.
No.
The men are the ones who are ultimately deciding, which is silly to me. So he's laying out the scenario that, oh no, there's trusted elders, men. Like, men is just supposed to be... it's just supposed to be assumed here when he's talking about trusted elders and people in the church who are allowed to ask these questions. He's essentially saying that this is very, very important stuff. It's very important, so it needs to be left to the men.
Absolutely, and it's ultimately.
What does that entail?
Ultimately, it's how the community is going to interpret the prophecy that was said. So even if a woman prophesied and said women should be allowed to speak all the time and maybe men should shut up, like if that was the prophecy that the woman said, they would make her sit down, and then everyone would decide how that should be interpreted, and that would be how it would be interpreted. Which is, again, this weird. If there is. That's a whole separate topic, but if there's a God, why is he delivering his message through things that need to be interpreted in the first place? It seems like, I don't think God could come up with a better system. That's a whole separate
It's a whole separate argument.
topic, but yes.
No, it gets better though.
But I love the idea that people are wandering around with notes from their pastor.
I'm
I'm smart and I talk for God to have a note.
At my other church, I did 12 prophecies.
And a
See,
sticker.
guys? I got a sticker. Certified prophesier.
From why we should trust you. They ask him, what did you mean by that? Is that consistent with the theology that we've got from Scripture?
Okay.
They're testing.
So what happens when he said, they ask him, what did you mean by that? Would they ask her, what did you mean by that if she was allowed to be a prophetess? Would they say, hey, Shannon,
You're right.
what did you mean by that?
I missed that the first time I listened to this. That is a direct contradiction, because clearly he would say the women are not to be answering that kind of question.
Right. So does then her husband or some other dude answer for her?
I guess so.
So there's an entirely different system to assess a woman who's making prophecy then.
It has to be.
Unless they're allowed to speak to answer these questions that Mike's prefacing as important questions. So why are men now allowed to elaborate on prophecies that they themselves have made, but women are not?
I guess because men can inherently be part of the interpretation team.
Right.
I don't know if Mike's trying to say that the person who does the prophesying has any more... I would say he's probably thinking that the person who made the prophecy doesn't actually have any more say than the other people.
Right.
than the other men. Than the other men.
Only men are.
So that's why we can exclude women from that. Is because it's the interpretation team.
Okay, and they're not ever part of the interpretation team.
And the women can't be on the interpretation team.
Okay.
Because they have their own separate change room.
That still falls back to I'm not understanding why that is an oppression, because you're creating a different class of people that you're saying are inherently not capable or equipped to do one of the most important things.
And that's actually, whether they're capable or not, they just shouldn't do it. Because God's plan was, and he's going to get into this when he talks about gender roles, like, Mike accepts that there are roles that God designed for guys to do, and that God designed for the XXs to do.
Mm-hmm.
So you're basically saying if someone's capable, they should be allowed to do both jobs.
Correct.
But in Mike's view, it doesn't capability makes no difference. This job was designed.
Well, then if capability makes no difference, and then that's nonsense. Like, what kind of system is that? That if your ability is not a component, like your expertise or capability or intellect, cognitive faculties don't factor in to your ability to do this job.
And the way I was raised, that is entirely accepted. That a male who is less qualified will be given a job over a female who's more qualified,
because that's the role.
Because that's the way the role is supposed to go.
So that seems trivially foolish to me.
And this is why, and we can get into it later.
Yeah.
A lot of people in the church will throw up alternate interpretations of the, or different verses at least, to say, well, this is meant for some very, very narrow case or something like that. Because, people who insist that there are gender roles, it doesn't work.
Fair enough. Okay.
And sorry, we are dealing behind the scenes. We're dealing
with a beagle.
We've never stayed with our dog before.
Yeah.
So,
I need to make sure that this prophetic statement is consistent, if it's from God or not. Like, test all things, hold fast to that, which is good. So the idea is, and this is consistent in the passage, preserving proper relationships, by proper relationships of authority and submission in a godly context, which is not oppressive, but is meant to represent to the world that the church is a place of order. And that's Paul's main concern in 1 Corinthians 14 is order in the church instead of disorder and chaos.
Okay, so tell me where I'm wrong here. He says it's not oppression.
He just decrees that it isn't.
I'm trying to wrap my head around why he perceives it that way. Is it because he sees it as voluntary, like women voluntarily subjugate themselves in this?
Not as much as this is the way. If God designed it this way, this must be the best way to do it, even if we don't understand why it's the best way to do it. Okay. So it's one of those mysterious things that you just accept that, well, God said it was this way, and even though it doesn't make sense to us, and we don't see the merit,
okay,
we're just blind. It's that authority thing. Well, okay, the Bible says.
I'm trying to make it make sense. So it's not oppression because God says it's not oppression, or it's not oppression because women should do this voluntarily. Which is, or is it a little column A, little column B?
Yeah, I would say both.
So in order for it to be oppression, you would have to do what? You would have to...
First of all, it would not be commanded by God. God can't command oppression in Mike's view.
Okay, so just definitionally it stops being oppression because God doesn't do oppression?
Right.
Okay, well that's just silly.
Well, sure, but...
That's... All right, because that just means that words don't mean anything
God doesn't
anymore.
Do murder, but hey, Passover happened. Like it's...
Noah's Ark evidently also.
Yeah,
okay.
so
Okay.
Because God has sufficient reason and design for how he did it. So, and then the other part of it, I lost my train of thought.
So let me stick on the other part then. So we'll grant that it can't be oppression because of that. But give the normal definition of oppression. Is he saying that, like, he can reconcile this in his mind as not being oppressive, saying that this is a role a woman should have, because he's saying should as opposed to must? Is that why?
I guess so.
So if he said a woman must do this, and he forced women basically into having these roles, or people like him, or anybody forced a woman into the exact same situation that he's proposing, then it would be oppression. But if they enter into it voluntarily because they're told it's the godly thing to do and that that's the role, and you manage to convince them of that, then it's not oppression anymore.
Yes, because the woman theoretically would also be wanting to honor God.
Right. So
would voluntarily adopt that role that they were given.
Okay. So it's not the act of a woman, or the idea of women having a completely separate set of roles and standards in society that they should adhere to. That's not an oppressive idea.
And he will talk about that. He 100% will address that later. So let's.
So long as you're not okay. I'm just trying to make it make sense. I'm
No,
trying to be as charitable as possible.
You know what? What basically Mike's saying is that if you think that there cannot be roles assigned to you,
right?
Then you're not gonna. Then he can't even talk to you.
Okay. So he couldn't have a conversation with me.
No, he's just accepting the premise up front that God can decide certain things.
So.
And that we don't get a say in that, and that our lives will be happiest if we just roll with it.
But he sees someone like me, sees a woman,
Yep.
as being a completely distinct and separate class of individual from him, with a certain set of things that if I were to be godly, or if I were to be good, because I'll just substitute godly with good, because they do that all the time.
Yep.
So if I were to be good, if I were to be moral, that I would need to adhere to, and one of those things would be deferring to him in all things, because he's a guy.
But also, if you were good, you would want to defer. You would want to just take whatever role you were given. If you were good, you would totally roll with that.
Right. So you're convincing large swaths of women that the only way for them to be good people, good God-fearing women, to worship appropriately, is to voluntarily enter into these roles, which is a form of coercion, which is oppression.
Yep.
We should let her out, I think.
So let me just switch to this, and you can keep playing.
Okay.
So yeah, that's my interpretation, and people are free to disagree with this, but it's simply saying, hey, ladies are not supposed to be the ones judging and sifting and testing the prophetic statements that happen in the church. If they do have questions, they shouldn't use their questions to probe and poke at stuff. They should just ask those questions at home. But this also says that women were present in the fellowship and were part of it and active in the ministry.
Yeah.
What do you guys have a follow-up question on that, or does that feel like I've answered it for you?
No.
I mean, he answered it, and I guess that's from his perspective. He answered it honestly. He really does believe that, and he believes it because his book says it. But I think that it's silly, and it is confusing and slightly worrisome to me that he doesn't. I mean, he said up front that he struggles with it, but when someone can settle into acceptance of something, something that's so blatantly not okay,
Right.
and do so with such a calm demeanor, that's troublesome to me. Because it's like saying, I've reconciled the fact that I'm superior to you. And, if you have a problem with that, that's just you being overly emotional, because you were created in X kind of way and I was created in Y kind of way. And that means that,
Right.
these are the standards that you are held to, and these are the standards that I am held to. And one of the standards that I am held to is that you should defer to me. I should lead you. There's a natural hierarchy, and I am up here and you are down here. But that is not oppression, because I can't force it upon you.
Well, the message is that hierarchy is not bad, and they will also say the message is, well, women
That's why it's oppressive. It's because
women have gifts that women have special honors that men don't have. So, and so that everyone's got the
separate but equal.
Right. Everyone's got equal.
Equal what?
Equal.
That's not equal though.
No. Everyone has equal things to please God with.
So silly.
And
gosh.
that was predetermined before you were born. So good.
Okay. All right. Whatever.
No, not so much a follow-up, just a comment that it's, well, first off, I'll say that was user 2DUTC who asked that one. Thank you for it. Good question. It's a complicated answer, I think, because it's, well, especially today. My wife
today.
and I discussed this topic.
Why do people keep saying especially today? Do you know what I think? I think people say especially today because we're starting as a society to recognize that this infrastructure has been so ingrained that it almost seems like tacit, that we take for granted that these societal roles that have been attributed to different genders and different other, they're all different manner of minority groups, should be pushed up against. So when they say especially today, maybe it's because now that there's this unprecedented awareness that this isn't okay and that we need to reevaluate these societal structures, because a lot of them are predicated on, nonsense like this. So, but saying especially today seems to me as though you're saying, previously we wouldn't have had to contend with this issue as much because, society was more accepting of the idea that subjugation of women was a good thing. But now we have to contend with it. Am I off base?
Oh, no. And I think what they're thinking is that, in 1961,
right,
people didn't seem to have a problem with this.
Well, people did have a problem with it,
of course
though.
they did. But, it's that idea that there was an idyllic time at some point when...
Oh, I hate it when people looked back at the past and are like, "Oh, those were the good old days."
Right.
Oh, yeah, right. None of us can vote.
I also like that he pointed out that Mike asked, "Hey, did that answer the question?" And he said, "Well, it was a complicated answer." I think we should have some Occam's razors in terms of answers here.
Well, they're about to have a little bit of a self-awareness epiphany and then push right past it. So let's
Quite a bit, and it's. I don't have an easy way to explain it, to be honest with you, because it seems very anti-2021.
Anti-2021.
It seems very anti-women, and
Before COVID, this was fine.
I know.
I don't know. Before COVID,
He got it on the second one though. He said anti-2021, and 2021 is just a year.
Yeah.
It's just a year. It's anti-women. It is anti-women, and that's why you guys have to contend with it. Because it's anti-women. But they wouldn't want to say that it's anti-women.
No.
If they contended with all of the things that this position entails, when you really analyze it and break it down, you would have to admit that you see women as lower on the totem pole for sure, if nothing else, right?
Well, they think it's a flat hierarchy. They don't think it's hierarchy. It's just flat and different.
That doesn't even make sense. That just,
of course it doesn't make sense.
Actually, that's just a nonsense statement.
Well, yeah.
Okay, whatever.
there's just a lot of things that have happened, even recently in the church. Leaders who have done horrific things that.
This makes me so mad.
This verse just makes it seem like it's a male-dominated thing we have going on here. We have three guys here doing this Q&A.
There's a self-awareness. Yeah. There it is.
This
is a great. What you're bringing up is a great point. I'm gonna highlight for a second. Is that okay? Let's say that the complementarian view is right. you're either going to view it as good and proper or as offensive. It's
Okay, so do you know what complementarianism is?
So there's two basic views within the church. One's complementarianism,
Good, you do. Okay.
where basically it's kind of what I've been espousing before, and Mike will say a little bit about it. Basically, where you feel like God created all creatures equal, everyone is equal, but there are specific roles that God intended for each gender to have. And then
We complement each
we
other.
complement each other. God created us to be complementary. So if you push against that, you are kind of
Like,
you're going against
you were
the
made
plan.
smart and strong,
Right.
and I was made to have your babies,
Right.
and raise them,
Yes.
and make you feel happy and listen to you.
Right. So complementarian view again, equal but different roles. Egalitarianism is the opposite, and that's running rampant through the church now. But basically,
2021.
that God created us equal and without specific roles. That roles that God. There's a lot of verses, a lot of passages that talk about spiritual giftings, and none of those passages ever talk about these spiritual gifts are for that gender, these spiritual gifts are for the other gender.
Right.
They also often point to, forget me if I'm getting the reference wrong, I believe it's Galatians 3:28, for in Christ there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. But all are baptized into Christ, and that's the verse that a lot of people throw up. Like God says, Paul also wrote that there in God there is not male or female.
But this is the helpmate squad, though.
Right. So
they don't believe the egalitarian.
But I'm just saying, yeah. So the egalitarian view, and obviously you can come up with proof texts. Like there's Bible verses to support each side, and that's why it's not resolved in the church. That's why it's a conflict in the church.
Right.
But yeah, Mike is in the camp. There's God created specific roles for specific genders.
Yes, and either you like it or
Right.
you think it's oppression. Is
Right.
what he just said.
That's right. Yeah.
I don't understand why he doesn't see that. Anyway, whatever. I struggle because it just seems so blatantly obvious. I don't even know why I'm laughing. It's not actually funny. Other than I don't know what else to do.
No, so like the way it affects real people, like in my seminary,
yeah,
women were allowed. Generally, they were encouraged to go into the Masters of Education program, like into the education and music ministry and that kind of thing.
Right.
They were discouraged from taking theology and pastoral care classes, and they didn't forbid women from taking some of those classes, but if they did, the way men were judged in those classes were like they had to give sermons and literally had to go to churches and speak.
Right.
The women who took the class weren't allowed to do the public speaking part. They literally had to write things up or do a home study or like make a video or something of them teaching. It was literally the class requirements were separated by gender.
So they created a separate type of structure for evaluations based on gender.
Yes.
But how is that not oppressive?
Well, that's the thing. And like a woman couldn't, at no point could a woman appeal. A female couldn't appeal and say, no, I want to be evaluated based on that other criteria.
Okay.
Like this was not a matter of, oh, I'm just choosing because that's the way it's going to make me happy.
Right.
Those were just the rules of the school. Now, obviously, any educational institution is allowed to make whatever rules they want. But I mean, it's a real world thing. Like this passage has impact to within the church generally, but it's negative. Yeah.
Okay. All right. We got some more.
There's a little more.
Oh yeah, there's a little fair bit more actually. All right, let's go.
like there's no middle ground.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
If the complementarianism is true, which means that we're equal in status, we're equal in value.
No, you're not equal in status though. That is smuggling in a lie. Because if we are equal in status, then I should be able to contribute intellectually to everything that you contribute to intellectually, including theology should I be somebody who's religious. I should be able to have the same status in the church. And he just spent a significant amount of time making an argument that men were of a different status. And because they were of a different status, that meant that they were able to do different types of things, that's why women needed to be quiet and ask their husbands about things, because they had a different status in the church. So they're not equal in status, even by his own standards.
If it was the same status, we would know the names of women who watched the cups at all these meetings while the other dudes were writing the books, right?
Yeah, or they would have taught them how to read and write so that they could write books. They would have not just taught men to read and write, and would have also taught women. You'd think.
Different roles. We have different roles. We're all heirs in the body of Christ. We have different roles and functions in the church as well as in the home. And you're either going to see this as good and proper, part of God's created order and design, or you'll see it as highly offensive. I think the complementarian view is true, and I think it's good, and I think our culture being offended about it is bad. Now,
okay, so I've already hammered this home, and I feel as though this is just me regurgitating the same stuff that I've already said. But when he uses the word "our culture" being offended by it, what he's saying is any individual who has an issue, or how I'm perceiving it, and that may not be what he's intending. I mean, I can't know what he's intending. But what he seems to be saying is that the way the culture is currently constructed, A, is bad because it doesn't encourage this sort of hierarchy.
Right.
And B, if somebody has an objection to it, it's not because they have a real or rational objection to it or some sort of coherent, cogent argument to make against it, but rather it is that they're being emotional or influenced by some sort of cultural zeitgeist that's propelling them towards this sort of irrational bad standard with regards to how people enact their gender roles in society.
Well, or a straight up rebellion. Like that's what.
Okay, what do you mean by that? That's interesting.
That you're just pushing against God's will because you're rebellious. So it just like any sin.
Okay.
This is just like any sin. You're selfish.
Okay.
And so being selfish, is bad. And you, Shannon, selfishly want to be able to speak at church.
When I should just
when
wait
you're
until
just
I'm home and
like
ask
that's just your sin nature getting the best of you.
But why is it? But that doesn't make any sense though, because then if you see us as equivalent in status, then and your reasoning for it being bad that I want to speak in church is that it makes me selfish, and being selfish is bad, then wouldn't, and if we are equal in status and value, then would it not also be selfish for you to want to do the same?
If I wanted to take what would be considered the women's roles, that would be selfish.
I don't understand that. Okay, so
because you're basically
what is selfish is wanting to do something that you are not made for?
Yes. And so this goes back to your AXP rant today. So that's why actually also why they consider, for example, they push so hard against transgender, because you are rebelling against God's design.
But no, you're not. Okay, well, I don't get me started. But
no, but it's all the same camp. It's all if you submitted yourself to God properly, you would just roll with the way you're made.
But that's so subjective. Like, he already admitted that there's two different ways to interpret the Bible with regards to
right. But he said that his way he thinks is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
But he's not providing support for why it's correct. Aside from an assertion.
No, aside from assertion, he's not. But I'm just saying it's not just.
So what makes something selfish is going against what your God-given role is.
Right.
And how do you determine what your God-given role is? Like, where is it listed out in the Bible that women do this and men do this? I mean, we already know that I shouldn't speak in church unless I'm prophesying.
Well, that's in Scripture and throughout the Old Testament. There's a lot of things that are specified that men should do X and women should do Y.
Okay.
But and then of course there's these handful of passages in the New Testament where Paul further elucidates, and this is the main one. But
fascinating. Oh, we're frozen again. Oh, I think we're unfrozen.
Okay, can you go to this view?
Yep.
Yeah.
Relating it to like say like Ravi Zacharias and his abuse of women. Well, that certainly is not biblical. On no reading of Scripture is that appropriate. I mean, no, absolutely not. Like this is disgusting and wrong and evil and horrible. And so yeah, like oppressing others is not the result, I think, of complementarian views. But
Okay, so you maybe didn't hear it, but you've listened to this already.
Yep.
But he just... This is the part where I got really mad, because he just equated what Ravi Zacharias did. And what Ravi Zacharias did was, if I want to have any chance of monetization, well, my chance of monetization is probably already out the window, but he
exploited female employees.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
He used a power dynamic.
Right.
To exploit women sexually. So, and now he's equating that. He's saying that's not the same. That's not the same.
Right. That's oppression.
That is oppression. This is where I my brain almost fell out of my head, because he's saying that if you exploit a power dynamic in order to utilize your position in a hierarchy to get a woman to submit to you, that's oppression. But this isn't.
Right, which goes back to what it said.
And he's also he's specifically using SA. He's using sexual assault. I'm just gonna say it. Whatever. Screw my monetization. He's specifically using sexual assault because he knows that that's something that everyone can look at and say that is bad. Mm-hmm. That is bad. Like everyone's gonna look at that and say that is bad. So he's saying, see, I know what oppression is. This is oppression. That is bad. And this isn't the same thing. And qualitatively, no, they're not the same thing. They're not literally a sexual assault that happens because a man is using his position of power in order to coerce a woman into subjugation to him sexually. Mm-hmm. It's not exactly the same as a man using a position of power within a social hierarchy in order to coerce a woman to subjugate to him as a life partner, or in X other scenario. The difference between the two is the sexual aspect. So he's equating oppression to sexual assault and saying that basically that's the only form of oppression, or you have to force yourself upon a woman. You have to physically do something to a woman in order to oppress her. There's no other systems in which oppression could be conceivable.
So I'm not sure if this is wanting to be charitable to Mike or charitable to the former Paul that used to exist.
No, I'm trying.
What I think what Mike would say is that oppression or a hierarchy is only okay when God specifically asks for it. And this is one of those cases where God specifically asks for it.
Whereas Ravi was already married and deviated from that, so that's bad. Right. And God didn't want this.
God didn't say.
God didn't ordain this to be the case.
Yeah.
Wow, this is why so many people have religious trauma syndrome and are such a mess. It's just.
Oh yeah,
that is why so many people come out of religious institutions and religious structures and religious communities and just don't know which way is up with who they are and how they can relate to the world. And it blows my mind. It's because you look at something like that and you say, well, it was ordained and thus it's okay. And you can find a biblical justification for it or some kind of justification for it, and then just rationalize it away because God is inherently good. So thus anything that God says is automatically good. And if you have a problem with it, it's because you are bad, not me.
Right.
I'm doing what God said.
and this is one of those things that I've learned from my viewers and comments, that female deconversion, females who deconvert have a whole extra layer of
Depending on what religious system they were
depending
in.
on what religious system they were in. If they're in one like Mike is talking to, or that I
Or
was
like
in,
a lot of Islamic systems.
right? That
Muslim
you know
systems.
that forced deference can leave a lot of scars that are beyond even the scars that I had. So yeah.
It floors the very same people who spend all of their time using, low tones so that people don't see them as threatening, and, doing these forms of obfuscation so that any criticism of them is seen as either, being overly emotional or being irrational. That spend all of their time talking about how they're the good ones can just rationalize so much obvious harm and just go, well, it's good. It's actually good. Like the most nefarious thing religion does is teach you that something that is doing you damage is good, and that if you don't think it's good, then there's something wrong with you, and you should just take that damage.
Right. And that's one of the reasons why Mike Winger is more dangerous than like a Pastor Anderson. Like the ones who are flagrantly pounding on the pulpit and yelling and being openly denigrating are actually, they're almost fine. Whereas like this Mike is like, oh, well, I did all the studying and I looked at all the scholarly aspects.
What am I going to do? It's what God says.
And, and this isn't the way I would design it, but boy, yeah, God. So in a way, this is more subversive.
Yeah, I don't know. And it just seems like they'll say that I'm bad. We're not. This bothers me, right? Because
I can't imagine why. No.
I couldn't imagine saying something knowing that it purposefully harms someone, and hearing people say it's harmful and continuing to propagate it once I know better and saying it's good, actually. I don't know, whatever. Whatevs. I'm just triggered.
We'll say this. I'm doing a research project on this topic, on the role of women in the church. Because I've always been complementarian, but I have not fully done every bit of research on the topic. So after I finish the Mark series, which I'm in coming to the tail of right now, I'm going to spend a month or so just reading everything I can get my hands on complementarian and egalitarian views.
A month of reading.
Do a full teaching on it.
That should cover it. That's all of it.
Bringing as much clarity as I can to the topic. And I'm open to changing my mind. I mean, maybe I would come and offer you a different view of this passage. I don't expect to, but I'm open to it.
Where do you draw the line then between, I feel like the controversy arises when we're talking about women's role in churches and ministry. The controversy arises when it seems to be held up as a tenet of biblical conservancy, which I think we've discussed earlier. That's not political conservancy. But when we're being biblically conservative, when we're sticking to the word, it seems to fall in the same circles as when we're talking about biblical inerrancy. If you hold to the Bible being true, then you also have to say that it comes across this way. I'm not saying that's what it says, but it comes across as women are less than men.
Do you think the Bible teaches that women are less than men?
I do not.
Okay,
I do not. But it's
so you're saying
challenge of trying to. It's
perceived that way. It's not that it is that way. It's that people take it that way. So this is where.
See, like that is gaslighting.
Right.
that is just gaslighting. That's what it is. It's so someone like me, a woman, a whammons, I feel as though, like, I've been being a bit silly, obviously, but I feel as though that there have been many cogent points that I've made in relation to why this does create a hierarchy where women are seen as lower and certainly seen as less valuable when it comes to especially contributing to things like theology, and also admittedly should be subservient to at least a certain degree to the men in their lives.
Yep.
And that is saying we are not equal. If we were not equal, if we were equal, then we would have an equal seat at all of the tables and wouldn't need to be subservient. We wouldn't like that's clear. So when you say when Mike says, you didn't say this. So when Mike says that it's not, that's just wholly dismissive and it's just saying what you perceive doesn't comport to reality, and I don't need to provide a justification as for why, because I said so. Like or at least I don't need to provide sufficient justification.
I believe that's exactly accurate. He has basically asserted these things. But don't worry, he's going to do a month of reading.
Oh, a month of reading. That should cover
then,
all of it, evidently.
And then
he'll
he'll
do
come
a
in
series.
with all the real justifications.
Jesus says, like, destroy this temple and in 3 days I'll rebuild it.
Mm-hmm.
How did they take it? Jesus is going to destroy the temple.
I see.
Like, well, this has always been the plague on Christianity. Find the weak spot where Christianity is the most vulnerable to vilifying it in front of people. So the early Romans, they taught that Christians were cannibals, right? Because they have communion, and they talk about how you have to, like, someone read the Gospel of John, you eat my flesh, drink my blood. They just like they misunderstood him in John. So I think almost misunderstood on purpose. Like,
Okay, so I want to talk about this for a second, because now he's saying that the reason people this is why it's gaslighting, because he's now creating this scenario for which this should be seen. Like, he's creating the lens, I should say, through which this needs to be viewed. He's saying, well, here's other scenarios where people misinterpreted the Bible. And obviously anybody who perceives these passages that he just laid out his belief on and talked about being a complementarian. So anybody who looks at these passages obviously could only have that perception because they're also misinterpreting and are likely doing it on purpose so that they can make Christianity look bad, because they likely have nefarious motives and they want Christianity to look bad, and that's why they're doing it. It's not because there's any legitimate criticism to be had based on the view that I myself just espoused. This is the reason, which is absolutely gaslighting. It's absolutely gaslighting. It's not dealing with the actual objections to the very things that he said out of his mouth. It's creating a phantom scenario that wasn't even a part of the equation and saying that this is in fact what it is. So these objections can be dismissed because anybody who has these objections is purposefully attempting to misinterpret the Bible to make Christianity look bad.
Well, the other reason it's disanalogous is because in the two examples he gave, the communion and the destroy this temple,
right,
those were people interpreting it differently than Mike would. But what we are doing is waiting for Mike's interpretation of this passage and saying, Mike, your interpretation, like, it's not that we disagree with his interpretation. We 100% agree that he's interpreting it correctly.
Correct.
But that is bad. So, like, those are not analogous at all.
Right. But I don't think that he was attempting to find a direct analogy. He was attempting to make a scenario where any criticisms of the position could be dismissed off of hand because they're seen as being bad actors.
Gotcha.
And that is just so gaslighting. It's just like, your objection isn't actually your objection. This is what your objection is. And that's why I can dismiss it. And if you say, well, no, that's not actually what my objection is. And you're like, well, Ready?
Ready.
There's a little bit more.
What's the worst thing we can say about them using their own texts? Okay, well, let's say that Paul's a chauvinist and he's oppressive to women. But when you actually read the text, that's not true. Like, this isn't true. Unless simply having different roles, is oppressive. So like, let's say that my wife comes to me and she goes, I always want to have a voice, and she does, but I'm going to let you make the final decision on things, especially big stuff. You know, I'll let you make that final choice. Is this an oppressive moment, or is this a moment of love and submission?
What do you think? Is that an oppressive moment, or is that a moment of love and submission? Because they're synonymous, apparently. There are synonyms.
Well, it is a moment of
Submission.
submission.
Why is that equated with love?
I don't see how it's necessarily loving at all. Because in a partnership, theoretically, both people are bringing different skill sets to the table.
Again, it seems to come back to, if she's voluntarily submitting to me, then I perceive that as love.
Right.
Like, I see that as a love act. I see submission as a love act. Right?
Yep.
So this is where it doesn't seem equal, though, because would you submit to her as a love act?
Right.
Right? I don't understand how logically you can say it is a love act to be submissive. However, I will not be submissive to her because she is the one who should be submissive.
Right.
So that is the way that she can love. I will love differently.
I will love by leading.
I will love by leading, and she will love by submitting to my leadership. Because you're creating a different definition of what love is based on, and how to enact that love based on the gender of the person, which is not equal.
Well, you're one of those people that just rejects that there's roles, Shannon.
I do, actually. Yeah,
so,
I do.
No talking to you.
I guess not. I don't know. I'm sure I'm trying to be a little bit silly and still make cogent and articulate points, but I don't think Mike would ever take something that I'm saying about this seriously, and I would like to think that he would, because there's not a lot of, I wish there were more female atheist sort of counter apologists who were in this sphere.
Me too.
Addressing things like this. But I mean, I'm one, and I'm relatively reasonable. I mean, I have my moments. But I don't understand how you can just define equality as utilizing differences. You can say we're equal in every way except for these 47 ways in which I do this and you do that and you do this and I do that, just by design.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm silly.
So we're almost to the end. So if anyone want to start loading up questions into the super chats, we'll take those questions.
Someone just became a member.
Oh, awesome.
Hi. Yeah, we can take some questions.
Start loading up the questions, and we'll wrap this up.
Yeah. Okay. We'll put it back on. He only has a few more things to say.
And if you're convinced this is oppressive, there's nothing I can say that's gonna ever change that. And
It's because
it creates a lot of angst and anxiety and irritation, and it creates confusion in marriages, because I think that if people don't know, like I've talked to people, I don't know, are you guys married at all?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I've talked to people who say in their marriage, like, well, we both make decisions. Nobody has the final call. Then I'm like, right. Somebody has the final call. It may be you, it might be your wife. Somebody does. Right? And if God says, here's how I want you to handle that, then you should handle it that way. Right? But if you've...
So we articulated what I was saying.
But his assert, I'm running out of words because I'm just reiterating things now. But he's essentially, it's just an assertion. He's saying someone always has the final call, which means, and in the framework that he set out, that means that someone consistently and always in a relationship would have the final call, which would mean that any decision that we're making in a relationship like, what to buy, what to get for groceries, where to go to dinner, like, like whether or not we're going to get a house, where we're going to go on vacation, how we're going to raise kids, yada, yada, yada. That there would be a person between the two of us, whether it be you or me, that always makes those decisions in a relationship. And that seems a ridiculous assertion, because when people say to him, we make decisions as partners, I recognize that you have strengths and that I have strengths and you have weaknesses and I have weaknesses, and that we, through dialogue, can, help each other better understand and improve each other. And then ultimately, sometimes there may be a compromise,
Right.
which isn't the same, but both of us will make a decision together. Perhaps one of us has to compromise or the other one has to compromise, but that ebbs and flows depending on the situation.
Absolutely.
Like, there's things that I may be better informed about, and there's things that you may be better informed about, or I have a more intimate perspective on, or you have a more intimate
Or
perspective
more
on.
often, we're both clueless and we just go.
Or we ask Twitter, right? Or we do research together and then inform each other with what we found. That's a normal way to have a
Oh,
relationship.
Mike doesn't believe you.
That's just a foolish assertion to say, yeah, somebody always has the final decision. That's just surface level silly to me.
And by doing, he also affirmed that I was talking about, like, the rebellion thing. When women don't accept this, they're creating angst, they're creating anxiety, they're creating problems.
Right. Yes, it creates angst, anxiety, and problems in marriage. And also the very last thing he said, and we'll probably end on this. I don't think we have any questions. Thank you for the people who sent super chats earlier. But what he ended on is, if God says you should do it this way, you should do it that way. So first he created this dichotomy where it's either a man or a woman in a relationship. And also he's, of course, just completely ignoring the fact that there are same-sex and non-binary partnerships, but whatever. So there's either a man or a woman in his world, where that's the only type of marriage that he'll acknowledge, is making the decision all the time anyway. So God says it should always be the man, so do it the way that God says.
Right.
Since somebody's always doing it anyway, in this dichotomy, this imaginary dichotomy that he's created, that just doesn't wash with my lived experience or reality at all, nor many others. Oh, look, someone used all my little... Yay, look at all the small cats.
Thank you, Allison.
Thanks, Allison. Yay. So, yeah, that's the last thing that I had to say. Do you have anything to contribute?
I have a slight apology to the guys who were on the sides. I have no idea who they were. I'm sorry, guys. I don't know.
Oh, I don't know who those guys on the side were. I enjoy
They said literally
the
nothing.
self-awareness,
Yeah.
though, with those two was just refreshing. My favorite part of the entire thing was when Buddy was like, well, we're just a bunch of, dudes. I'm like, yes, you are a bunch of dudes sitting talking about what the whammons should do. Yeah, And that's another thing. Like, I don't think that he would. Oh, I've been yelling. Oh, you can cough. I'll mute.
Excuse me.
Coughing over. Yeah. Oh, what was I gonna say? I got distracted by your cough. I was going to say that what's frustrating is that somebody like me, I don't think that they would even take seriously as having something to contribute to, or at least that's a message that they're giving me through their words.
Right.
Is that someone like me, a woman, the person they're talking about is not someone whose opinion is valuable.
Well, accepting
in this
gender roles
conversation.
accepting gender roles is the cost of entry to have a chat with Mike. He won't even, like, you're not even worth talking to if you don't already agree that.
I gave up a long time ago, assuming that Mike would ever have a conversation with me outside of Twitter or even in Twitter. I don't think he would even talk to me on Twitter anymore. Because he seems to mostly be concerned with shepherding.
Yeah, he shifted
More
his
so,
ministry.
He doesn't really do apologetics anymore. But people, like women in church, are still people. I don't care just about atheists. I care about people. And I just don't know how somebody can look at that perspective and think to themselves, yeah, that seems fine. This is right.
Clearly lots of Christians don't, and that's why.
Yeah, I guess so.
Cheers to you progressives. On this topic, anyway.
Yeah, I still don't have end screen music. We can put up. Thanks for the 2 super chats that I got earlier. I appreciate you guys. I am back, so I'll be doing more stuff. I should do the YouTube thing that people do. Click the subscribe button and ring the bell. Ring the bell.
Ring the bell.
Ring the bell. Look in the description. There's links on how to support the channel. I have I forgot what it's called. Patreon. Patreon and a.
Thank you to our supporters who bought me this mug.
Oh yeah, we moved into a house together. That's why we haven't been. Oh, and it froze. There, it's on frozen now. Paul moved to Nova Scotia, so that's why we haven't been. Well, he's been still pumping out content, but I haven't because we had to do my whole setup. But we made an Amazon wish list that Paul promoted on his channel. I guess I should mention it. I put it in the description for anybody who is interested in helping us with stuff for the house. Because people expressed the desire, and we're okay.
Yeah, we're fine.
We're fine. We're okay.
This was
we're
just
okay. But people
wanted to.
asked how to support us, and so we did a thing. But yeah, you can do that stuff. I have a buy me a coffee and it feels so weird saying. Give me money for this stuff or whatever. I don't like it. I'm good at this. I'm a bad YouTuber. I am so bad at YouTube.
If you want to understand YouTube, you can ask your husband at home.
Oh, I hate you right now. Oh my God. We're not married, for the record.
No,
I have no one to ask. I'm going to put the screen up. Look. Yay. I don't have music yet, but I have a screen. Now I have to say my tagline. Thank you for tuning in. And as always, everyone, help elevate the discourse. Bye.